The recent decades have been marked by a rise in income inequality across the Western countries, but there has been a lack of popular concern about this worrying trend. Today, I will talk to a sociologist who has studied this paradox. He has found that citizens of unequal countries not only underestimate the level of inequality, but also strongly believe that societal success is the reflection of meritocracy. Dr. Jonathan Mijs is an assistant professor of sociology at Boston University in the US and also a Vennie Fellow at Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Hello, Dr. Jonathan. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mahmud.
Okay, great. So because you started this paradox of inequality, and I want to start with this. You found that despite a rise in inequality, as I said, especially in the Western countries, popular concern has not grown, and people have even become less concerned about it. Can you tell us more about this paradox? It's like, I've been thinking about this like a cancer. You have cancer and it's advancing to an advanced stage, but you are not worried about it. Is it something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the parallel of climate change to some extent, where the differences with climate change is such a slowly unfolding catastrophe that some people may not really sort of see the process unfolding, like the frog was being boiled or something like that, and doesn't notice it. But I think with inequality, it's even more striking in a way, because there's so many signs that our societies are becoming not just more unequal, but also more segregated, right? So as an analyst looking in, as a sociologist or an economist or as a journalist, it's fairly easy to see and to document those changes and to record indeed how in many Western countries we see incomes, we see wealth just becoming a lot more unequal over the last couple of decades. But once you set that against the public record of public opinion over that same time period, that's where this paradoxical situation emerges, where simultaneously as inequality has increased in many of these Western countries, we actually see that people are not becoming less, but they're becoming more believing that their society is this meritocratic place where people deserve their success, and also they're not getting more concerned about inequality. And then the latter, those two things, I think, have something to do with each other.
Yeah, okay, but why is this happening? Like, what have you found in your study? Why does this paradox exist, and why are people not concerned about it?
So, there's a couple of ways in which people have tried to make sense of this, right? So basically, it may be that people just don't know about how much inequality there is. It could be that they do know there is inequality, but the inequality that they're aware of, they're just not that concerned about. They could have very good reasons to not worry. Could also be that they are concerned and worried, but they don't think there's anything that can be done about it, right? And I think it's a little bit of all three. But where I sort of fall on this question of trying to make sense of this paradox is by really looking at what does it mean that societies have become more unequal over this last couple of decades. What has been the sort of the social impact of income inequality growing, the gap between very highly educated, college-educated people and people who don't have such a degree? What does that mean in practice, right? It's kind of because we're talking about like numbers, like a statistical reality of inequality, a Gini coefficient, or right, we can express it in numbers, but what does it look like on the ground? And that's where I think what's happening in many Western countries is that we're seeing rich and poor live their lives much more sort of really sort of separated by enormous fault lines in what neighborhoods they live, what parts of the city, or sometimes it's a rural-urban divide as well, but also the kind of schools people go to, kind of workplaces that they attend, even the social networks, even things like who people find as romantic partners and who they settle down with and have kids with. On all of these grounds, we see a growing socioeconomic segregation where more affluent, college-educated people are more likely to surround themselves with other people who share that income and level of education, resources. And if that's your reality, if that's your day-to-day kind of context, then you may not really be aware of that much inequality, right? If everybody around you has a similar level of income as you have, has enjoyed the same kind of advantage and privileges, then you really in your day-to-day life are not seeing all that much inequality. Hence, you may not be very worried about it. So that's, I think, a big part of the explanation of why we're seeing this paradoxical trend in public opinion.
Yeah, and I think I can see a reflection of my life in Bangladesh when you were saying this. As I was growing up, I grew up in a middle class family. I went to a school where mostly middle class students went. And now I'm talking to you, and as I was reading your study, I was thinking that I had never had any rich friend in my life. So, you know what? I have always had friends in my life in school where they all came from the same socioeconomic background. So maybe my father had a job, and also my friends, their fathers also had a job. So the businessmen, usually, of course, they make a lot of money. They make much more money than people who have a job. So I did not have a lot of friends whose father had a business, but most of my friends, their fathers are doing a job, and they also came from the same socioeconomic background or situation. And now, as I understand this, that because I didn't have any rich friends, so I don't know what a rich household looks like, or how do they think. What do they think about us, the middle class people or the poor people, and what we think about it, because we don't know much about the rich people, because I have never had, as I said, rich friends. So what you found, I think it actually relates to my life, as I can tell you that it's very accurate. I had no idea. Even these days, I do not have any idea about the rich people's lives, because I don't have any rich friend. All my friends mostly come from the same socioeconomic background that I do. I've never had any rich friends. Maybe rich people have nice and fancy cars. My friends, my friends or the families didn't have those type of cars. And my family, we don't have a car. And even these days, we don't have a car. So it's the thing. And I can see a reflection of this, that what you found is actually very true. If you do not see past your socio-economic circle, you actually have no idea what people on the other end of the spectrum look like, what their life looks like.
You summarized it better than I did. And let me reassure you, you're not alone in this situation. In fact, this is very much becoming kind of the typical situation which people find themselves, and it means that people are increasingly unable to really develop a good and an accurate perception of inequalities in their society, because they just don't encounter the full range of inequality in their day-to-day lives, right? So in that sense, it's very easy to look away, and it's very hard to have a good sense of just how privileged or disadvantaged you are, right? I mean, inequality is a relational thing, right? So it's kind of how much how much disadvantage you face is something that needs to be understood and experienced in relation to all the advantages other people did enjoy or did benefit from, right? But if you can't see that, then you don't really experience it as inequality, even though, like I said, as an analyst or as a social scientist, we can document these things, but they don't really resonate with people in their day-to-day lives if, indeed, people lead these segregated
lives,
social lives.
Right. So your study found the citizens' life in meritocracy has ironically become stronger with the rising levels of inequality. Do you think by blaming it on meritocracy, they're trying to, kind of avoid facing the truth, as the truth may make them uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, so meritocracy is basically a society in which we think that people kind of find their path and end up in a position that they deserve to be in, whether that's a position of having a high level of income, great job, etc., or economically struggling. It's kind of like thinking of everybody's position in society as a reflection of just how much they're working, how hard they're working, and how talented they are, right? So meritocracy is very much kind of like a way to justify existing inequalities, and that's very much also what the word how the word originates. It originates in a kind of a warning. A book by British sociologist Michael Young wrote it in the 50s. It's kind of a warning sign of where all of these standardized testing and big government bureaucracies, where he saw things developing into, in a society where it's not just that there's inequalities, like there was in, say, the old aristocracies, where some people are born poor, other people are born rich. No, it's a society where people still, by virtue of their, who their parents are, etc., can enjoy enormous privileges. But we convince ourselves that where you are in life is a reflection purely of your own efforts, purely of your own actions, your decisions, your hard work and your talent. And as such, we cannot even complain about inequalities because they're fair, because they're just, because they're deserved. And that's a much more cruel situation, a much more cruel society, even than some of the really unequal societies of our past, right? So that's how meritocracy came to be a word that we're familiar with, but somehow that word has come to mean something that people strive for, that policymakers hold up as an ideal that we should pursue. That's not how it was intended at all. As I was saying, I think that's not the meaning of the word, though. It's a way to justify inequalities, to kind of undermine people's concerns, and to indeed live with these inequalities, rather than some sort of path toward a utopian, fair society.
Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you about my life again, as you are saying this. In our country, the university admission system, that phase is really competitive because we do not have a lot of places in the university, but we have a lot of applicants. So in our society, as we have grown more and more unequal, at least the Gini index shows that Bangladesh has grown, increasingly unequal over the years. So when like 20 years ago, I completed my higher secondary 20 years ago. And when I was, doing this, sitting for these university entrance exams. And even these days, the situation has not changed. Back in those days, we were told that you need to really compete with applicants, and you need to really have a very good exam. You need to really do good at your exam, and then you will secure a place in the university. Yeah. But the thing is, this is how inequality has grown, and also the belief in meritocracy in the context of Bangladesh has grown. Back in those days, maybe for one study place in the university, 5, 6, or 7 students were competing. So there are 7 applicants. But now these days, for the same one single study place, at least 40 or 50 students are competing. Oh, wow. So, but still, the narrative remains the same. Parents are telling their children that if you do not do good, it's all about, doing good in the exam and proving your talent. But the playing field is no longer, it's a level playing field, it's a tilted playing field. When you have 5 or 6 students competing for one study place, maybe, it kind of, let's say it's fair. But when you have 50 people competing for the same study place, it's a tilted playing field, and you cannot actually compete, because no matter how hard, if 50 people are competing for the one single study place, no matter how hard they try, 49 people will automatically be eliminated. Even if, let's say 10 or 20 people among them did really, really well in the exam. So this is how I see it. Like, even if inequality has grown, we are not focusing, our parents are not focusing on that. Our parents are still focusing on meritocracy. Like, if you really do good in the exam, you can actually have a place in the university, and then you can graduate, and then you can enter the labor market and, have a good job. But, this is the reality. This is the twisted and distorted reality that they are not seeing. And I have really thought about it after I came across university. I have really thought about the situation in Bangladesh, which takes me to the next question. You found in your study that citizens in unequal societies understand income inequality in meritocratic terms, but those in egalitarian countries see the structural and non-meritocratic factors. So can you elaborate on this difference in perceptions?
Yeah, so I kind of think about it based on my own experience of living in different countries in the West, where the country I'm currently in, the United States, is really the paragon of inequality. Highly unequal society, but also a very segregated society, both in economic and in racial terms. But let's focus on the economic. What it means is that rich and poor really live in separate spaces, just as I was describing earlier. So it becomes hard to see the full extent of inequality in your society. And kind of paradoxically, if you're in a society that is less unequal, that is less segregated, you can actually see those inequalities much more clearly, because there's still an opportunity to interact with people in a different social class with different levels of education, different levels of income, because you're not so sort of, ripped apart as much as it is in the most economically segregated societies. So in that sense, I think it's easier to develop a more accurate perspective and a more better understanding of how unequal your society is, if that society still affords opportunities to meet others and interact. But once those interactions, once those fault lines become so deep and so wide, people really lose touch of each other, and also don't really have a clear understanding of how much inequality there is.
I was actually talking to a guy from Iceland like 2 or 3 months ago, and he said something that just came to my mind. He said, you know what? I mean, in Iceland, when you walk down the road, it's not a surprising thing that you will meet a rich person. So, as you are saying, like in the US, you have segregated lives. And also in Bangladesh, we have really, really deeply segregated lives. There are posh areas in our capital city where only rich people live because they can afford the housing there because it's really expensive. But we live in other places. So what he said, actually, it doesn't happen because Iceland, it's one of the most equal countries in the world. But in countries like Bangladesh, you don't actually walking down the road. When you're walking down the road, you don't meet a rich person. It's not possible. But in Iceland or maybe in Sweden, in the Nordic countries, they always come at the top or near the top when it comes to equality. So in those countries, maybe they can have this kind of interaction. As you said, if you have that kind of interaction, then you can get a better understanding, better sense of what their lives looks like, and the difference between your class, and their class. That brings me to the next question. Are inequality and meritocracy mutually exclusive? What do you think?
No, they work together really well, right? In this way that I was saying before, is in that inequality is justified by belief in meritocracy, right? So meritocracy is basically a system that converts inequalities to something that is morally acceptable, that people agree with. And that's really the purpose of what meritocracy is and what it does. Yeah, so they're very much, close cousins rather than opposites.
Yeah, like they are not distant cousins, they're close cousins. Okay, so we often see in the media the rags to riches stories and those of other astonishing accomplishments made by outliers. Do you think such stories play a role in strengthening the misbelief in meritocracy, which then distorts how we perceive inequality?
Yeah, absolutely. Because particularly American culture, but I think many cultures have elements of this. Some of it goes back to religious texts as well. But there's a lot of sources, narratives that we're familiar with, stories that we hear from people around us, that we read in books, that we see in television series or TV shows, that celebrate, like the amazing, unique talents of extraordinary individuals and celebrates their success. There's a lot of reality shows, from like music-based things, like Bangladesh Got Talent. I'm not sure if there's a version of that, but those kind of show The Voice and Dragon's Den. There's like a whole range, or even survival, like those kind of survivalist shows. But what they share is that they kind of paint a picture of people being able to accomplish anything with their talents, right? And that's great if that is true. But unfortunately, for many of us, our talents are not sufficient to take us all the way. And in fact, what talents really are and what is considered talent also changes a lot over time, is different in different countries, right? I mean, if you're born with a particular set of skills that make you a great American football player, then it's great to be born in the US, right? But if you're born with the same set of skills in Norway or Finland, it's probably not going to take you very far, right? So also even something like talent is very context specific, historically specific, yet we celebrate it as sort of an innate ability that people have that will always translate into success, which just really isn't true. So yes, there's a lot of these stories that are inspirational. It's great, but they're also, that's the other side of the coin, they're also telling us that you can make it as long as you work for it, that your talent will take you all the way. And it's kind of implicitly saying that if you don't make it, if you do struggle, then you're either not talented or you didn't work hard enough for it. And that's the shadow side, I think, and that's what I think meritocracy does to legitimate and justify inequalities.
The Gini index shows your home country, the Netherlands, has much less income inequality than the US. And also the World Economic Forum's 2020 Global Social Mobility Index, it surveyed 82 countries, and it found that social mobility is significantly higher in the Netherlands, which put it at 6th position, than the US, which came out 27th. Why are the Dutch doing so much better in controlling inequality and creating social mobility than Americans?
Unfortunately, the Netherlands does struggle with a lot of inequality, right? It's just in relative terms, it does a little bit better. There's two sides to this. Like, one is, I think that once you're kind of stuck in an inequality paradigm like the United States, it's really hard to break out of it. The Netherlands it's a smaller society, smaller scale, more interactions. And I think that also means that people are just less willing to accept really massive inequalities, right? So there's more of a political push. There's a lot of political parties that are active on the left and on the right that are actively engaged with trying to limit the number of the amount of inequality. That still there's like a million families who struggle economically in the Netherlands alone, which is a lot on a population of 16, 17 million. But so it's not a perfect country at all. But I think it's sort of once you kind of break out of that paradigm, it becomes really hard to break out of the paradigm. But the other part of this question is that there's another kind of pernicious inequality that's very real in the Netherlands, but that's not very visible. That's wealth inequality. So if you look at wealth inequality, the United States and the Netherlands actually rank about at the same level. There are massive amounts of inherited wealth that some people in the Netherlands have access to, other people don't. The wealthiest 10% of people in the Netherlands own about 80% of all the wealth in the country, and about half of the population owns absolutely nothing or has debts. So that kind of inequality is just a bit more hidden from view. Because people may have a sense of how much income others have, but this is kind of like, this happens in the background. So another way to think about it, perhaps a bit more cynical, the same is true in Sweden, by the way. Same kind of high wealth inequality, low income inequality. So the other take on it could be that people are willing to support government redistribution as long as they still have their wealth to fall back on. That may be another way to think about the position of the wealthy in a country like the Netherlands.
Okay, and before I leave, just one last question, and you can answer it in brief. Have you ever always wanted to be a sociologist in your life?
I mean, I wasn't very original because my parents, they actually, they both went to university. And in fact, my mother met my father at university. They were both doing sociology. So I was like the least original person in my entire friend group. I tried to consider a lot of other paths. I looked into economics and history and psychology, but somehow I was kind of like I was gravitating towards sociology. It was probably instilled in me in some way by my parents. Never expressed. I don't think they wished that I would be, but somehow it happened anyway. So that's been my very unoriginal path.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Jonathan, thanks for your time and thank you for being on my podcast. So have a good time. Goodbye. Bye bye.
My pleasure.